OU's Big 12 final, and I mean Big 12 final. Or could there be another one? We shall see. Oklahoma football talk right here at the Voice of College Football, Sooners Live. And if you've caught up with us here in the last couple months, you know that we are piecing together a show with a number of guests that we bring through each and every week. So we appreciate you all stopping by. We've got one of the very best here, Parker Thune. You can catch him on Rivals, OU Insider, and also KREF Sports, Monday through Friday, noon to 3 Central Time. Parker, how you doing today?
Doing great, Mark. Always a pleasure to sit down with you.
Yeah, appreciate you being here. And let's try to get through the computations first. So in the Big 12, this is how I see it. And I have not dug into it top to bottom, but Oklahoma State owns that three-way tie over Kansas State and Oklahoma with head-to-head wins. But if that becomes a three-way tie, then maybe it becomes a little bit more complicated than that. Maybe it doesn't. But if we take it to the other end of the spectrum, before I cut you loose here, Parker, we've got Iowa State, Texas Tech, and West Virginia. They're all a game behind the other three. So if we really want to get crazy, they all play different teams. If those three win and the three with two losses lose, we've got a six-way tie.
Gosh, it's such a bizarre scenario to process, Mark. But frankly, that's one of the reasons why I just haven't been worried about it. I haven't bothered diving into the tiebreaker scenarios just because it's almost more trouble than it's worth at this point. Look, it almost feels like, you know how the college football playoff committee really every year since 2014, the very first year we had a 14 playoff field, they haven't really had a tough decision to make. It's always been right there in front of them. And so I kind of have taken the same approach in trying to process what the Big 12 championship scenarios are going to look like. The way I look at it is like all of these doomsday Armageddon scenarios where you have a five-way, a six-way tie for first or for second. I'm just not willing to entertain those right now because practically speaking, my belief is by the end of the weekend, once all these teams have played, there probably aren't going to be that many weeds that you have to dig into to figure out who's going to play in the Big 12 championship game the following weekend in Arlington. For Oklahoma, it's as simple as this. You got to take care of business. Obviously, you got to beat TCU, and then Oklahoma State has to lose. Who would have imagined that the team that got spanked by South Alabama on their home field back in non-conference play would be on the verge of shutting the Sooners out of their final Big 12 championship game?
I typically root for chaos, and I guess that's why I take us there first and foremost. But you're right, 90-some% of the time, the teams that have that position to begin with are usually the better teams anyway. So they're usually going to take care of business, and the teams that are just scraping by and just hanging on by a thread are typically in that position because they've got some flaws and they're not quite as good as the other team. So it typically does work out. I guess, Parker, I like those final weekend NFL playoff scenarios where you figure if they win, but if they lose, you got to go through all the computations. I kind of enjoy that. So I just try to apply that to these division races. But Oklahoma State basically controls its destiny to take on Texas.
That right there, Mark, is part of the reason why this has become so convoluted, is because the Big 12 has really become the first divisionless conference. And it was easy to break all these ties, even in theory, back when everybody played each other and you had a 10-team conference. But now that you have a 14-team conference for 1 year and not everybody plays everybody else, that's where you get all these wacky scenarios that theoretically could cause major chaos on the final day of the regular season. Will they? Probably not, but that's kind of the root of this whole controversy over the last couple of weeks, is that the Big 12 just really wasn't prepared to have a 14-team divisionless conference for a year.
Parker, before we grind down the personnel, to extend on that point that we started with would be, this is the final game in the Big 12 for Oklahoma. They may have a championship game to play, but anyone wiping away tears or anything like that, upon an exit of the Big 12?
No, not at all. I think most everyone on the Oklahoma side is excited for what the future holds, understand that the SEC does constitute greener pastures pretty much any way you slice it, revenue, competition, recruiting base, etc. So, no one is wiping away tears, to borrow your phrase there. I think this is everyone has kind of come to the agreement and understanding that once they have their swan song in the Big 12, whether that is this weekend against TCU or in the Big 12 championship, if they manage to sneak in the back door, that you can wave goodbye to nearly 30 years of history in the Big 12 conference with good memories, no question, but more optimism than cynicism as to what comes next.
Yeah, a lot of good memories, no question about that. This is a school that's dominated its conference pretty much unlike anybody else. Maybe Ohio State's right there, but that Oklahoma has had control of this conference unlike anybody else across the nation. So certainly take pride in that, Sooner fans. We got Parker Thune here, of course. We're talking Oklahoma football. Leave your comments and questions if you have any. And join Parker at OU Insider on Rivals and KREF Sports as well. All right, let's get down to it in regards to this TCU matchup. So I see Gentry Williams should be back this week. Dylan Gabriel could or should be available. And then we also have Jalil Farouk. Are those pretty much the three in question in regards to injuries?
Yes, pretty much. And Gentry Williams is expected back. He has suited the last 2 weeks, but just hasn't played. So you figure Oklahoma was probably in a situation where if they desperately needed Gentry Williams to go play cornerback, they probably would have pulled the trigger on it. But they haven't needed him. They ran away from West Virginia, and BYU was gashing him on the ground, not through the air, excuse me. So you didn't really need Gentry Williams, didn't really feel the need to press him into action against BYU. But Gabriel and Farouk are interesting cases, Mark, and that's because they both are dealing with what peripherally appeared to be head injuries. And Oklahoma is one of those schools that they have a reputation for being extremely scrupulous about players clearing the concussion protocol. And they are never, ever, without exception, going to rush anybody back from a head injury / concussion. And so, to be honest with you, I'm sure it has happened before. I'm not implying that it hasn't, but off the top of my head, I cannot recall the last time a player at Oklahoma cleared the concussion protocol in a single week, let alone an abbreviated week. So the fact that you have a 6-day turnaround from BYU to TCU, combined with the fact that Oklahoma generally takes things very slow. That training staff, that medical staff generally takes things very slow with their players who have to go through the concussion protocol. I wasn't all that optimistic going into Brent Venables' press conference yesterday that Gabriel and Farouk were going to play on Black Friday. But Venables comes out and says, hey, you know what? If those guys progress the way that they have the first couple days since we got back from Provo, I expect that they'll be available. And it was a stark contrast to last year before the Texas game when Gabriel was dealing with a similar injury and Venables refused to answer questions or discuss his status at all. So again, it would be pretty unprecedented, at least in recent memory, for a guy to clear concussion protocol at OU in a single week, but it does sound like Venables, at least, unless it's gamesmanship, and that's always a possibility, he does expect to have his quarterback and his number one wide receiver back.
And I'm glad to hear that. We tend to, at times, think about these games as like video games, and these guys are not necessarily human to us that, especially the fans that just watch on TV and so forth and don't have contact with these guys as individuals. They're young men. They have lives to lead. They have futures that need to be taken into consideration. So that's good to hear that they take that extremely seriously, even beyond what most teams do there. Parker Thune's here. We're talking Oklahoma football, of course, here at the Voice of College Football. It's the final go around for Oklahoma hosting TCU. And so one of the big storylines, obviously, was Jackson Arnold and his performance in the second half coming in for Dylan Gabriel. He wasn't asked to light it up. He threw, about 9 passes in the game, but at the same time showed off his running skills and that he could, maybe more so than anything, Parker, handle the offense.
Well, and that's what you want a backup quarterback to do, especially on a day where offensive points and sustained long drives came at a premium, partially because of the conditions, partially because of the fact that both of these teams played a pretty good defensive game. Oklahoma did surrender a lot more than they probably would have liked to on the ground, but they tightened up when they need to. They won the turnover battle 3-0. And so this was a game that both of these teams just kind of had to grind out. And so would it have been great and would it have been a fun story if Jackson Arnold had come in and slung the ball around for 250 yards in the second half and thrown 2 or 3 touchdown passes? Sure, but that was probably never going to happen given the circumstances. And within those circumstances, really all you can ask of a backup quarterback is that he comes in and doesn't crash the bus. And that's what Jackson Arnold did. He was 5 for 9 for 33 yards, carried 8 times for 24 yards, led a couple of long drives, one of which culminated in a Gavin Sawchuk touchdown that was ultimately the decisive score. And he also led a drive at the very tail end of the game that allowed Oklahoma to run out the clock. There was another drive he led in which Zach Schmidt missed a 28-yard field goal at the end. Would have liked to have had points there. In the end, it didn't hurt the Sooners, though. And so, yeah, again, was Arnold spectacular? No, but he didn't need to be. And you probably wouldn't have liked to see him try to be spectacular. They did push the ball downfield on a couple of occasions. He overshot Nick Anderson on a deep ball that might have gone for 6 if he hits it. But he did exactly what he needed to do to put Oklahoma in position to win that game, and they ultimately did. Everybody on the Oklahoma staff and in that locker room, they were incredibly pleased with not only Arnold's performance, but also his poise. That 3rd and 7 throw to Jalil Farouk with just over 2 minutes left that effectively iced the game, that was a play that Arnold checked into. That was not the original call. He audibled at the line of scrimmage, saw he had a one-on-one matchup outside with Farouk, the guy who he seems to have the most trust in, and he took advantage of it. And that right there is something that, it's not true freshman stuff. So he did have some freshman moments, but there were also some flashes of that promise that made Arnold a 5-star recruit in last year's cycle.
So, Parker, not the best of opponent in BYU. They're a 5-win football team, but difficult conditions to a certain extent, hostile place to play, just known for being a death trap for a number of teams that are highly ranked. And then in addition to that, you lose your starting quarterback about halfway through the game. Are all of those in play to kind of excuse what was, in a sense, a lackluster performance?
Yeah, I think so. You got to hand things off to another quarterback mid-game, and it was hostile. It was rainy. That's a really fun environment. That's a really fun venue to watch a college football game at, Mark. It was legitimately one of my favorite road trips, maybe my absolute favorite road trip ever. That BYU crowd brought it. That BYU team brought it. They played a heck of a football game. And, when you're a heavy favorite like that, it's easy to look at an outcome where the underdog covers and it's a lot closer than many expect, and it's easy to say, okay, well, we didn't play our A game. And to an extent, that's true. Oklahoma didn't. But by the same token, you just have to tip your cap to BYU because that was a team that fought tooth and nail for 60 minutes, executed a game plan that kept them abreast with the Sooners for the vast majority of that football game, and ultimately made some really key plays throughout that helped sustain their momentum and prevented the Sooners from pulling away. So in as much as Oklahoma left some meat on the bone, it was also just a really strong game by that BYU team, which showed out on senior day in front of their home crowd and came very, very close to scoring an upset victory.
Here's the deal, folks. This is our Sooners Live edition that we do here each and every week, at least once a week, sometimes twice, 139 times, as you see there on the screen. We bring through the very best that we can find, Parker Thune included, to talk Oklahoma football with us. So if you have any suggestions, recommendations, requests, please let us know. And you will see a version of this on our Big 12 channel as well. that we launched before the season. And yes, of course, we will transition that to our SEC channel when that time comes very soon. And then put together an edition of preview with TCU side on this on the main channel at the Voice of College Football. So, but in terms of the live show, please make it here. And you do that by subscribing and hitting the bell for the notifications. TCU, a rough season for them. I think that most of us had forecasted a little bit better. Nothing close to what they accomplished last year. They're coming off a big point total against Baylor. Josh Hoover at 412 yards. Jared Wiley, a guy that a lot of us became familiar with, of course, in their I was going to call it a championship season. It was in no way a championship season, although they made it to the championship game, but did not win the Big 12, nor, of course, the national championship. But Jared Wiley, a really good player, and they put up points against Baylor. And this is the final go for them as well in regards to this season in the Big 12, trying to get to a bowl game. So that's their incentive at 5-6. I have not looked at the line, Parker. I got to think it's about 15, something in that range. Your thoughts about this coming matchup?
Yeah, I believe last I checked, you're right, Mark. It was Oklahoma by 14-ish. So I'm not sure how that's moved since Sunday, but that is kind of, especially with Oklahoma on their home field, that is kind of the expectation is the Sooners by circa 2 touchdowns. Now, for this TCU team, there was going to be regression, right? Especially losing Max Duggan. And just if you watched that season back last year, you watched those 12 games that TCU won en route to an undefeated record through the regular season and a berth in the Big 12 championship game, ultimately a college football playoff victory and a national championship appearance. You kind of got the sense that there was an element of chance that went into it, right? Like they played well, don't get me wrong, but there were some things that bounced their way over the course of the season where if you replay it, 10, 20, 100 times over, that's probably not a team that's replicating that season in 2022 ever again. So again, credit to TCU for making it happen, but it was always, I would say they outperformed what they actually were as a football team in 2022. And so that's all the more reason why things were going to crash back down to earth. But as we sit here today, the Horned Frogs are 5-6, and you brought it up. They're playing for a bowl game. And where are they going to go, right? Not a bowl game that anybody is going to be paying a ton of attention to, but it's less about that for many of these programs and more about getting the opportunity to practice 15 more times, see what you have going into next year, kind of process whether there are a few standouts that emerge and see what kind of firepower you can carry into 2024. So it is as much about the practices as it is about the actual game for many teams that are kind of straddling that line of bowl eligibility. So I would imagine TCU does come out on Friday with a little bit extra motivation because they know what's at stake. Josh Hoover has played good ball for the most part since taking over as this program starter. They have really just aired it out. They've let him stand back there in the pocket and pick defenses apart with his arm. They're not going to try exceptionally hard to establish the run, but the last few games they haven't really needed to. Now, Kansas State beat them soundly, but other than that, Hoover's played good ball and TCU has played pretty good ball here down the stretch. So this is a program that in somewhat understated fashion has given Oklahoma several battles over the last few years and obviously took them to the woodshed last year down in Fort Worth. Dylan Gabriel was injured in that game and the Horned Frogs just ended up pouring it on. But I do expect they'll come out with some fight. I would think depending on where the line falls, it's probably a coin flip whether Oklahoma covers, but this does feel like a Sooner team that's better than the opposition in the Horned Frogs by about 2 touchdowns. So it's close to a push in my eyes.
Parker, unless something drastic happens in this game or in winning and then moving on, if Oklahoma State loses and other things happen, get to a Big 12 championship game, maybe pull off rematch upset against Texas. So there is some variation as to how this thing could land. But basically, this is a team that we pretty much know who they are, how good they are, what they are at this point. Moving into the off season, do we expect this is very much a situation of stability, or do we see possible changes in the coaching staff in particular?
Well, that's the coaching staff is what's going to be interesting, Mark, because Jeff Lebby's name has obviously been thrown around for a variety of head coaching vacancies, most notably Mississippi State, I would say. Uh, Jim Leonard is getting back into the coaching ranks, and you would not think that has any impact on Oklahoma. However, the thing about Jim Leonard is he is very close, and in fact, former teammates with Oklahoma cornerbacks coach Jay Valai. So you have to wonder if maybe Leonard getting a DC gig elsewhere compels the program that hires him to also make a run at Valai. Those are kind of the two guys right now off the top of my head amongst those 11 on-field coaches that I would say, okay, maybe they at least look elsewhere, even if they don't end up going elsewhere, because both of those guys had opportunities to take other coaching jobs last offseason, ultimately declined them all and returned to Oklahoma. And there was only one new coach added to the staff this season for OU, that being wide receivers coach Emmett Jones, who took over for interim wide receivers coach LaDamian Washington. He had one season as the Sooners interim receivers coach in the absence of Cale Gundy. So I do think that a lot of these guys on the Oklahoma staff right now have a certain degree of commitment to keeping this all together. And I also think that as far as Lebby is concerned, Mark, if he were to help Oklahoma transition to the SEC, remain at his post as offensive coordinator, and allow Jackson Arnold to run his offense for a year or two, there will probably come a point in time, especially if Arnold lives up to the billing, that Lebby's name is getting thrown around for jobs that are much bigger, much more significant, much more elite nationally than the jobs his name is getting thrown around for right now. So it's kind of, short-term gain versus long-term gain. It depends on perspective, kind of depends on how you look at it. But I would look at Lebby and Valai as maybe the two guys that you're a little bit unsure about because of the opportunities they may have elsewhere. Ted Roof, the linebackers coach, grizzled veteran in the coaching ranks. I think he's close to retirement. I don't know when that would come, if that might come this offseason. But I think when that does occur and Roof is finished with his coaching tenure at Oklahoma, the two guys that it's easy to imagine would end up filling his shoes as the new linebackers coach at Oklahoma would be Brian Odom, who formerly held that post at Oklahoma before leaving with Lincoln Riley's staff to go to USC. And then, of course, James Skalski, who was a decorated All-American linebacker under Venables at Clemson and has really made a strong impression on most everybody across the staff, across the locker room, in what has been his first season at Oklahoma as a graduate assistant this year.
And I'm sure Lebby and Brent Venables could have an interesting conversation about grabbing a particular job now versus maybe waiting and getting what you really want.
No doubt.
On down the road. Parker, it's been a couple of weeks since we spoke, in National Signing Day's 3 weeks and a day away, I believe. And anything to update us on the recruiting front?
No, not particularly. Oklahoma has the vast majority of their 2024 class committed. They have 27 scholarship pledges, so one of the largest of the 21st century for the Sooners. They're really only waiting on two guys right now. Well, three. So they have an outstanding offer to three-star defensive back Cameron Campbell out of Florida. They hosted him on an official visit a couple weekends ago. That situation has kind of been in a holding pattern for a while. He was formerly committed to Michigan State and is kind of in the process of re-exploring all of his options before making a decision. The two high-profile guys that have yet to pledge anywhere that Oklahoma is in the market for are both offensive linemen. Eddie Pierre-Louis, four-star offensive guard out of Tampa, Florida, and then Grant Bricks, four-star offensive tackle from the small western Iowa town of Logan. Now, the Sooners are battling UCF and Oregon for Pierre-Louis, and they are battling Kansas State and Nebraska for Bricks. Both those guys expected to decide in the coming weeks, sometime before National Signing Day. But that's really it for Oklahoma right now. They've got the vast majority of that nucleus in this recruiting cycle already pieced together, and they will be in the market for a couple flips, especially depending upon what happens at Texas A&M. They finished second in the recruitments of a couple of blue chip prospects who ended up pledging to A&M. Wide receiver Terry Bussey from East Texas, defensive lineman Dominic McKinley from the Lafayette area of Louisiana. So I think depending on how the coaching carousel spins in the next couple weeks, especially, the Sooners may have the opportunity to add another name or two to this class. But right now they got 27. They're gunning for Campbell, for Bricks, and for Pierre-Louis. And then from there, it becomes a question of who feasibly can you flip in the span of just a couple weeks before signing day.
Parker Thune, KREF Sports. His show airs each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. That's noon to 3 Central, and OU Insider on Rivals. Parker, hopefully you're able to clear the deck on Thursday and enjoy your Thanksgiving, and also enjoy the game on Friday.
Thanks so much, Mark. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Parker. Appreciate it. Again, that's Parker Thune. We so much appreciate him stopping by. He's got a ton of things going, and appreciate his time. Again, folks, this is OU Sooners Live here at the Voice of College Football, and our deal is we present this live on the SD1 Sports channel. Here is probably where you're watching it. We are simulcasting on the Big 12 channel, and we launched that Big 12 channel back in August, and probably most of you could care less about the Big 12 at this point. I totally get it. You're moving on to the SEC. We will simulcast this show moving forward on our SEC channel that we also launched in August, so please check that out. We will take this and put it together with the TCU conversation with Melissa Treebwasser for an Oklahoma TCU preview that you can catch on the main channel here at the Voice of College Football. If you have any requests for any guests here on Oklahoma football, please let us know. You can always hit me up at markrogerstv@gmail.com or just leave a comment right here to this video. Appreciate you being here. Keep it locked in here at the Voice of College Football. Plenty of breakdowns throughout the week. Just on this day, we are talking Texas A&M, Bama, Florida State, Miami, and others. We've got our Florida State, Miami shows on Wednesday, actually, and at 5:30 Eastern today, our Iowa show. And we do a big watch party for the College Football Playoff Rankings reveal every Tuesday at 7 o'clock Eastern time. So join us for the watch party and on the main channel here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you being here. We will see you next time. And we don't see you for a few days. Happy Thanksgiving.